Ready to roll? Cool. Thank you everyone for coming to Nanda Hobbs to see Braddon Snape's beautiful exhibition, An Act of Restraint. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Beautiful show. So I want to start off by asking about the process of actually making one of these sculptures, because I know it documents the process within it, but I'm still trying to figure out the exact way you've put these together.
Kind of where do I start in a way, but the simple version is that it's, in its most simplest form, it's a couple of sheets of material welded together with a valve put into the edge. You can put the valve in the edge or into the middle of the form, and really then it's the actual compressed air that's forcing those sheets apart into its form. So in the simplest forms, maybe like the hanging black piece is just those two sheets, and then I get more complicated. Like the folded pieces will have it varies. I have for this piece, it's a series of spot welds along the seam to create the two chambers.
Right.
So the air can still get through, but it won't inflate in that area. And so then it inflates through those two chambers. Then I'm sort of folding the works. But the more complicated ones, like the green ones, or the green one, or the pink ones, or the red work, they're multiple pieces. So they're more complicated, and I actually usually make a cardboard or paper, a little pattern basically of how that will work flat.
Right.
And when I'm trying it for the first time, I'm kind of guessing and going by what I've done before. But if I'm trying something different, just sometimes the shift in the relationship between where the two forms are, like the red pieces, they're shifted. That's why it's called axial shift and pop. So it's sort of the profiles are shifted, but shifted from there to there will change things completely.
Right. And
also the relationship of the surface area as opposed to the thickness of the material, or where a curve is, or where a joint is in relation to. So it becomes a complicated relationship of all those things.
One thing to play for sure.
Yeah.
So just on the thickness of the steel, because they look like they've got a solid weight behind them, but they're really not hugely heavy. Like this one behind us, I would kind of, at first glance, I thought it was 250 kilos.
2,500.
I'm not good at reading. Come on. But it's only about 50, 60 kilos. So is it a thick steel, a thin steel? This
is 0.9 of a millimetre, this one, and most of the painted ones are 0.75 roughly.
Right, so it's a relatively thin surface.
Yeah.
All right, cool. And that's easy to manipulate with the
air. And also the nature of that material, the stainless steel, surprisingly, I love welding the stainless steel for starters, but it handles the process well.
Yep.
And the 0.75 mil steel, getting technical I guess, which is cold rolled steel, which is the kind of stuff that your microwave or your fridge is sort of made out of, right? And it's designed to be able to be pressed and folded and so on.
So it's kind of built for
it
this
gives better. Whereas if I get in, I've done up to 2 millimetre steel, and it's different. It's hot rolled steel. It doesn't give as much. It's a totally different thing. It's more like there's less crumple. There's more refined lines and stuff like that, which is a beautiful thing. But it doesn't give as much as well. So it's it has its positives and its negatives.
Of course. And how did you come across making in this way? Because I did a bit of research on you the other night. A lot of your early work is made out of timber or steel again, but not inflated steel. This is a relatively new process for you. Last 3 or 4 years?
5 years now. About 5 years now. Yeah.
What kind of sparked the thought of, I'm going to weld 2 sheets of metal together and inflate it?
Well, the spark of the thought was, I'm always, as a sculptor, one of my biggest interests one of the biggest interest in being a sculptor is manipulating materials so much, getting my hands on materials and kind of exploiting materials and for what I can, understanding their properties and exploiting that, right? And thinking of alternative ways of using processes as well. So I was thinking like that. I was actually thinking how, and I'm always looking for economy in the sense of economy financially, but also economy in the studio with lack of large industrial equipment and so on. Mm-hmm. Getting compound curves in steel, so it's curving not just through one plane, but through two planes, or axes, can be difficult to do in the studio, particularly without that sort of industrial equipment. So when I saw Mythbusters try it, right, they were trying to make a nose cone for a missile or something like that, and they just did this square piece and inflated it, this big square piece, but they only sort of blew it up like that, and they're behind screens and doing all that, building up the drama as well. I just thought if I could do that, then I could cut sections out once it's inflated, cut sections out, and I'd have these sort of compound curves.
Right.
For using to make kind of more lyrical kind of works.
Because your previous work was kind of very lyrical and kind of metaphoric in that sense. Yeah. And it's sort of more hard-edged, I guess, as well, refined edge. So that's what I thought I'd be doing. But the moment I did that first inflation, I knew this was so exhilarating. It was kind of like, this is a whole new world kind of thing. So that was about five years ago. Wow. Yeah. And in that process, what I really enjoy about your work is that all the process is left in the artwork. So especially in the kind of stainless steel ones, you can see all the welds and all the creases. It kind of becomes an object of its own process in a way, and it's kind of recording its making. And in that sense, with your video work, you've recorded the process of making in the sculpture itself, but then you've gone and reacted with the performance piece of physically beating the sculptures. Is that an interesting relationship?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's changed my whole practice. My practice has changed completely because of this, that I'm thinking about process so much, and the process, the making is the process, the outcome is the process. And then part of that was all, so the manipulation of the material through the process and it under that duress, all those kind of associations that it has with that, the pressure, the capitulation, all that kind of stuff. So it led me down that path of, the revealing the process, but also the kind of the drama in the works too. And then I guess I did an inflation performance in the cell of the lockup, where I had, this kind, a 5 by 4 metre jail cell in the dark, and a large work the size of this on the floor, inflating it with people crammed in around it. Wow. And the energy in that room, like the energy for me when I'm inflating is something, but having a room full of people that are surrounding this thing in a jail cell with the hose coming through the bars in the window and in the dark, and the metal popping and creaking and reverberating, and that anticipation, that pressure kind of thing, it just unlocked another thing for me, the performative nature of this process. So that sort of, from then, I kind of, people are always inviting people to come and watch an inflation in the studio, so the inflation keeps becoming a performance. So that kind of led to filming the inflations as a performance. And then I guess the next step, particularly in the process of the lockup show, was because the work was going to be about the imagined violence of the cells, incarceration and stuff. It was, just the next step for me, really, to then to almost kind of take back control of those forms in some way, or you know,
reworking them in your own sensibility, opposed to it doing its kind of doing your making a mark like a painter would with a brush. It's the same kind of act in a way.
Yeah, and sometimes with the ones that are more controlled, you know, that aren't beaten or whatever, but you know, sometimes over the time, you know, I've pinched it here with a pair of pliers or something like that, or so it would start to give in that place and stuff like that. So that was a start at that, I guess. But
there's quite a physical relationship with kind of these forms, especially this kind of beautiful hanging piece behind us. In the essay that Faye writes, there's kind of a relationship with the human form in its own kind of inhale and exhale. There's a physical form.
Yeah.
Is there a human relationship with what you're making in a way? Because I feel like this has very much the hanging martyr sensibility, and you had to work at the Newcastle Gallery as part of the Corpus exhibition, which had that kind of direct conversation. Yeah.
I think, I mean, proportionally, you know, they kind of have that kind of anthropomorphic kind of proportions, but I think the fact they're filled with air, well, it's air that forms them. It's kind of like that idea of breath. And then that stored energy, they kind of retain this kind of life force in a sense, even though they've got no pressure in them now.
Yeah.
Once they're formed, there's no pressure. But yeah, I mean, that sense of, you know, that breath, that in-breath, that, you know, that holding of energy kind of thing, I think, you know, brings those associations. But yeah, so then, you know, identifying that's the process, isn't it? You identify that and then sometimes play on that idea of them, you know, having that kind of human, you know.
Because I really do kind of see the religious iconography somewhat in this work, and it's quite interesting.
So this one kind of led to that work at Newcastle Gallery, you know. So with that one at Newcastle Gallery, the proportions are more figurative, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
It's more human form. And when you're inflating them, there's a sense in these works that they could burst at any moment. I watched a video of you inflate one online, which was quite fascinating. It crinkles and it pops and it moves kind of uncontrollably. Is there any chance of them somewhat exploding in the process? Or is that something you've kind of tried to work towards or avoid?
There is, mostly, you know, because I've been doing it for a while now, I do it fairly slowly, and I'm watching the process, and then I'll stop and see what's happening and then continue. So most of the time, they will just, somewhere where the steel knots or creases or whatever, it'll start to pull away and create a little leak. I can fight against that leak and keep pushing it. So I can push it in the air quicker and quicker to make up for the leak, to keep it blowing.
You push it a bit harder.
Yeah. Or sometimes then I'll stop and I'll re-weld and then keep pushing if I really want to push it. Most of the time I can't help myself. I'm sort of trying to push it. You know, that's kind of the deal. I don't know. I just want to push it, see where it goes. So sometimes I go too far, and but most of the time it's just a little pop at the seam. You know, like the corner of a packet of chips or something. You know, popping or something like that. You know. You've
never had the big burst where all the chips kind of spill out on the floor.
No, but I want to do that.
Yeah, because I think that would be a really interesting kind of relationship to see an inflated one and one that's kind of exploded per se. Yeah, so I've done, the first one that popped on me was this big, right? So it was the size of a pencil case. It actually looks like a pencil case, that the zippers popped open. But it was only this big, and it was 2mm steel, right? So it was a lot of force to get this small piece. So it's as I was saying before, it's the relationship between the shape, the size of it, but also the material surface area in relation to the thickness. So this one I just kept pushing, and it was on the ground and I was nearby, and it sort of jumped up about that far, opened up about that far, and scared the hell out of me, of course, the first time. But
But still, it wasn't like some big explosion or something like. But it did this opening up, so it's planted that seed for
future
potentially, putting things away from me, because I'm right on them when I'm inflating them in the studio. But those ones I would probably put over there somewhere while I'm
get
inflating.
the screen like Miss
Yeah,
Buster's
that's right.
did.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, it's an incredibly intriguing process what you're doing. I think it's got beautiful results. The one last thing I want to ask is the impaling piece.
Yeah.
What brought you to that kind of thought process of impaling something like this?
I guess it's the tortured nature of the process and the forms. The sort of that energy, and it's the material under duress kind of thing. And then it was the opportunity of going back to the lockup. Having that opportunity in the context of the lockup of the history of incarceration in Australia kind of thing, or you go further into colonisation and so on. But so it was the imagined kind of violence and kind of things that happened in those spaces.
So it's back to that kind of the theatrical drama of the process.
Yeah. And it was more so imagined as well, and not so much recounting things that happened, but we all have a sort of understanding of what happened, in 19th, 20th, early 20th century, jails and so on, the violence and the conditions kind of thing. So it was having that opportunity to play in that space and play with the architecture of it as well as the
it
forms.
Definitely activated the space of the lockup as it does here.
It's
Beautiful.
Well, it's a sculptor playing with materials. It comes back to that, getting your hands on materials and processes and exploring them and that relationship going back to the relationship of the body to those forms, to those materials as well. Yeah.
Really interesting. Does anyone have any questions for Braddon?
Yeah.
Jonathan, of course you do.
Generally speaking, they're all two sheets put together to sort of get this almost pillow-like shape.
These kind of ones, yeah.
Have you previously experimented with other shapes, circles and so on?
Yeah. So the yellow piece over there is kind of an example of an extension of the kind of circular kind of donut kind of form. And
what about 3 pieces?
And 3 pieces, yeah. Yep. Not so much from starting off with a form itself. I've only been working in starting with complete flat forms. But my list, I've said to Anthony, we were talking about the blowing things open. My list gets longer. The more I make, the list of things that I want to do kind of gets longer. But yeah, I've done quite a few of the kind of circular pieces and some other more complicated pieces like the red one and the green one. I've tried copper, not very successfely.
Because it doesn't take a weld? Or?
Yeah, it didn't, and it tore. It's kind of so soft it was tearing at the joins. Maybe and aluminium, but aluminium I'm not that experienced with welding. It's a lot more difficult to weld, so I haven't. I want to get down the track and play with some more aluminium as well because it's soft, but it should give pretty well. But yeah.
And it would scratch so easily too, wouldn't it?
The aluminium, yeah.
You don't get those nice
No, I wouldn't go for something like that necessarily. I mean, yeah. And it's kind of choosing the right material for the right thing that I'm trying to do as well, like that as opposed to a painted work or something like that, I guess. But yeah.
Any more questions, Ralph?
I've just had to duck out, but you may have answered this. The surface, the choice of keeping it raw or reflective or high key colour, does that come from the form, or is it preordained that it's going to be intensely pink or yellow, or so is that something, or do you create the form and then?
Often the colour, the final decision of the colour comes at the end. It's kind of, it's that, I don't know, it's without kind of sounding airy-fairy or something, arty-farty or something, I don't know, but that it speaks to me kind of thing. But it really does. I kind of pop them and then I go, oh, that one has to be yellow, you know. Or before this work though, you know, I kind of fairly formalist approach to making sculpture. So I got these two things going on. So it was always this kind of idea of the truth to material. So, you know, if it's steel, you need to see it's steel, you know. So, you know, a lot of rusted steel kind of forms or so on. But yeah, I mean, another thing I'm enjoying with these ones is obviously that interaction, you know, that phenomenological sort of interaction of the viewer and the work. So that the fact that with the reflective works, that the fact that you're there with the work moving around, things are changing because of the nature of that reflective surface. So I enjoy that about that. And the painted ones, I kind of enjoy the fun nature of, I'm having more fun with my work than I ever have before with using colour, you know, because I hadn't previously used much colour.
It does set up a really interesting dialogue there, doesn't it, when you think about some of these things that are intensely poppy, using a material that's not necessarily very poppy, you know, like in its raw state, very tough, yet it can be really, you know, almost floating. Is it the clouds as well, which are not exhibited here? The clouds at Maitland, mostly? Yeah, so, you know, for a different purpose, I guess, as well. But I guess the opportunity, you know, when I'm making them, even the steel ones, the regular steel works are similar finish to that stainless steel work, the propped one. And so I love that surface, the way the light hits that surface and so on. So it was good for that opportunity for the lock-up to put the raw ones in. It worked for that, particularly for that show. So, yeah.
I feel there's like a real tension of breath or a sensation of life through breath for these works, and how they're displayed is almost cutting off of breathing or air and suspension or impalement, or even in is also flotation devices and air. Is that something that you're conscious of, or particularly through the means of construction that they are maybe there? Yeah,
I think it's that sort of contest of those two things. That's always kind of been in my work. Before this kind of work, there's always been those kind of tension of the binary tensions, of the opposites kind of thing. So one thing pushing or pulling against the other has kind of always been in my work. So I guess for me, that was an obvious thing to happen as this work developed for that. And to play on, it's that energy, you know, I mentioned that sort of, there's that pent-up kind of energy in the work, I think, playing with that. Yeah. And it's just feeding off the process, I guess.
Which is like completely contradictory to the medium itself, the metal, where it's almost beyond any human intervention in some ways when it's raw sense. Yeah,
and we don't see it. We don't see metal like that. Yeah.
No.
So everybody gets to see the metal differently now. Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Anthony, you had a question?
Does Newcastle have any bearing on the work?
As far as its kind of industrial sort of history, is that kind of what you mean, or? I don't know. Probably, I guess so. To subconsciously, you know, that the industrial background of Newcastle is always there. In me growing up in that space. Maybe. I mean, industry was always right at hand too for a sculptor. So I think Newcastle's bred some good sculptors. Yeah. Maybe because of that, and things are accessible. You know, industry was kind of accessible, maybe. But one of the biggest influences, probably for me more so, is probably my background in sort of boats and sailing and stuff like that. The form, you know, the form of boats and of water as well, but surfboards but I keep going back to my childhood of boat hulls and working on them, you know, sailing on them, but also working on them. That understanding, that kind of aesthetic of form and understanding materials and stuff, I guess, is just as importantly informed where I'm at now. Yeah. But the life ring thing, definitely, the life rings for boats and stuff like that, that's played into certainly those kind of works. Yeah.
Did anyone else have any questions for Braddon?
I do have a question. You mentioned with your red piece that red piece is a piece that has more, like, let's say, components that you cannot control as in other pieces. Is that something that you enjoy, as in having that unknown factor of what the piece is going to be like?
Yeah, that I really enjoy it. I mean, that's one of the best things about my work taking this direction, is that I've lost a lot of. It used to be so controlled. Like I would know what my work was going to be halfway before it was finished. Right, it was all planned out, designed out, planned out, and the rest was just getting to that end result. Whereas this, I can enjoy this right through the process, and it's that real balance of control and chance that I really enjoy, and seeing what that next thing does, and then feeding off that for the next work, and so on as well. And so that's a big aspect of it.
Excellent. And I have another personal question. The piece that we have from you, which is the 5 chambers, which is actually 5 circles. Yeah. Every circle has 2 dents on each side. Yeah. I was always wondering how you make those dents.
No, that's the process. That's the process dictating. Yeah.
Oh, really?
So the thing about the steel is it doesn't stretch, right? So if you're blowing up a toy, inflatable toy or something like that, it's vinyl or rubber or whatever, and it stretches, so it kind of can give, right, in those places. Whereas the steel can't. It just goes kind of where there's more material, right? So if you're doing a round thing like that, generally it'll go in 2 points across, sort of across from each other, right?
Yes.
But with your work, it's 5 chambers, so, and then there's a hole in about that big inside each to join all those chambers. So then there's that relationship of that hole to the outside, and then there's the relationship of where that hole is in relation to the outside sort of circumference. So if it's in the middle or if it's down here a bit, changes everything. And then those 5 things are competing against each other, right, as they're inflating. So all those kind of relationships happen. So yeah. So
What about these folded over pieces? Do you inflate them lying flat? Or are they actually hanging?
They're laying flat, yeah.
But how do you get the,
So that's the interesting thing about steel. It can be soft and floppy, and it can be structural, right? So the points where it's not inflated, it's only thin steel, so it's actually quite floppy. So I can manipulate and bend it over. Yeah.
So you make that piece in the process?
Yeah. So the freestanding yellow one over there, the 3-chamber one, I have 2 big clamps that I made that clamp those crease lines, and so I blow it up, just enough gap in those clamps so that the air gets through, but it keeps those flat spots, and then I fold it into its configuration afterwards. Yeah.
And aside from that, Braddon, you don't have control on where these dents go, or can you use ropes and things to sort of...
You kind of can to a point, but for instance, if it's a rectangular piece like that, it's going to crease at the bottom into that kind of point, and it's going to crease the most in the kind of middle of the sides, generally, of that rectangular form, because that's where there's the most material.
So that one, where it's actually
further up, yeah. I don't have...
Did you make that happen?
No, that was kind of where it started to go. And that was one of the ones where I creased the other side to make it match so that it all went in that other spot. But generally it's going into where there's little tiny variances depending on how I've welded it and things like that. But yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Braddon. Ralph is now going to speak to Catherine Longhurst in the back room about her show Flights of Fancy. Thank you all for listening to myself and Braddon.
Thank you.